A couple of you have been asking for more explanation of my third channel, which of course is an insanely twisted series conveyed through a poor animation. And while my second channel's ARG is something I've also been working on feverishly, this Conniving Puffin remains the most confusing. The last two videos I've made explaining this covered seasons 1 to 5 and seasons 6 to 10. Now, we're doing some of the most strangely crazy seasons in the whole series, seasons 11 to 15. Get ready to be confused. Hello, I'm the Theorizer, and we start off where we left off at the end of Season 10. While Mildred tries to bust down Antoinette's door, Antoinette uses a spell to look into her own past and try to figure out why Poe and Suzanne were evicted. She traces her memories to a time when she was a baby, where Bill was babysitting her and Jane. Mandy walks in and throws Bill through the wall before pulling out a massive burgundy gemstone, which apparently can control Poe. She forces him to teleport himself to her, and he tells her that he didn't think he'd see her again after she stole the professional disabling gun, implying that this takes place shortly after. Mandy explains that tonight is the night she's going to hypnotize her granddaughters and kill the rest of her family. She knows that the chance of her coming out of this alive is slim, so she asks Poe for answers regarding Suzanne's eviction as a child. She tells him that she doesn't even know how he knows Suzanne, but he seems to know everything, so he begins spilling the beans. Poe explains that it was Mandy's grandfather's fault. She doesn't even know that it's Poe who is her grandfather, but she still listens attentively. He explains that Suzanne's evil was not her fault, nor was it the Mayer family's fault. It was Poe who was framed by somebody else for doing something horrifying. Through tears of dismay, Poe explains it was actually an entire family who framed him, and it was because they had a vendetta against him. Mandy screams at Poe to hurry up with the story, telling him of the horrors that she has endured. She reveals that her mother buried Philip in an unmarked grave, and whenever she goes there, she has to lie about who's buried there because of her trauma. Poe promptly describes that the family's last name was McKeithenshalls. They were a family who controlled most of the city a long time ago. Even the mayors feared them. One day, Poe was distracted while driving, and he ran right through a red light, crashing right into the McKeithenshalls' grandfather. After the family framed him for doing something terrible, Poe learned alchemy to retaliate. He killed them all, except the youngest girl, known as Julia. He explains how alchemy corrupts people, and then he clears his throat and claims that he isn't corrupted. Somehow. He continues to explain that Julia grew up evil and married a man named Justin. Together they had a daughter named Ginger. Antoinette freaked out after gaining the knowledge that Jameson's mother was the last of the McKeithenshalls. She flipped out. We zoom into the 0th dimension and find Ginger torturing everybody with fire, including Miss Finch, the torturing woman. Antoinette ponders over this new knowledge. She wonders if Jameson only married her so that Ginger could break apart Poe's descendants from the inside. Antoinette remembers Jameson telling her that Ginger put a spell on her grave before she died. Antoinette feared this. Meanwhile, we watch as the mysterious spy woman peers down at Antoinette and then leaves the building. She slowly walks down to the beach cave and opens a new portal with ease right into the 0th dimension. She finds Ginger inside. Ginger calls her Roberta Andrews and asks if it's time. She asks if someone has figured out her grand plan. Roberta tells her that Antoinette has figured it out. Roberta, this whole time, has been Ginger's spy. Roberta hops through the portal and Ginger pops out of her grave. Ginger thanks Roberta, fires her as she no longer needs her, and begins to exact her revenge. Back in the past, Poe keeps explaining to Mandy how after he crashed into their grandpa, the McKeithenshalls kidnapped Faye, Poe's wife. They then kidnapped Poe and Suzanne. They then lit a bomb, leveled half the city, and blamed it on Poe. The mayors arrested Poe, Suzanne, and Faye and evicted them onto the streets because they were believing that it was them because the McKeithenshalls, of course, framed them. Mandy fears the McKeithenshalls, so right then and there she makes the decision to assassinate the current mayor instead, as we see her do in Season 5. But then, Mandy asks one final question. Why did they kill Philip, the mayors? Poe stutters and doesn't want to talk about how Suzanne did it accidentally, so he says he's gotta go. But before he leaves, Poe explains that he has prophesized something terrible. If Mandy ever finds herself in a situation where a woman with a burnt face pins a ton of people against a wall, this event will take place right before the end of the universe. She tells him that sounds incredibly oddly specific and weird, and she doesn't give a crap. She says that she can still use his power though. So she sticks the gemstone Poe controller inside of her soul, allowing her to control him from wherever her spirit goes, hence why she controlled him from deep limbo back in season 7 and 8. Poe warns her that with such a device in her soul, Suzanne will be able to have direct access to it, and she'll be able to completely destroy Mandy with evil. She asks who her grandfather truly is. Poe laughs and tells her that she is really oblivious and an idiot. Out of anger, she banishes him to China, keeping him permanently frozen in a single spot until she needs him again, keeping him frozen until season 8. She monologues to herself about how she's now going to kill Bill. Back in the present, Mildred finally busts through the door and shoots Antoinette just as Antoinette finishes gaining all of that knowledge. Then Ginger storms in and screams at Mildred, telling her they need to have a little talk. Mildred has no idea who Ginger is, and Ginger introduces herself. She says she's usurping Mildred's spot as mayor, and she's going to run the city her way. Out of options, Mildred goes to the beach cave in hopes that she will find a way to open the limbo portal and access the 0th dimension to get her friends to help her. With enough alchemic powder, she can succeed. She finds some and bursts right into Roberta's hidden portal. Mildred goes into it, and Roberta watches as she does this. Roberta promptly finds Ginger and tells her of the news. Ginger becomes agitated and screams at her, saying she's fired her, she no longer needs her help. Roberta explains herself, and Ginger feels insulted, thinking she was calling her dumb. Ginger throws Roberta into the ceiling and tells her that if she doesn't shut up, Ginger will do what she did to the rest of Roberta's family. Interesting. Ginger then monologues about how she's going to destroy the core family and tangle them in their own strings like the puppets they are. Season 11 ends. Lots of reveals this season, as you can see, and things get a little less confusing upcoming, but for those of you who asked for this video, pay close attention. Season 12 begins. We find the heroes and villains from the Grand Puffin Massacre in Season 10, and the villains have locked up the heroes in a massive cage, all except Mozart. And as Veronica, Marina, Kyle, Bill, and Beatrice all remain caged, Mozart's hopping around in circles. Just then, Mildred appears through the portal and drags him back home, but Mandy sticks her hand through the portal, jamming it before it closes. She then sends Antoinette, Jane, Charles, David, Jameson, and herself through it, and then it finally closes. Pleased at the outcome of this situation, Ms. Finch comes out of hiding and begins to torture the helpless, caged heroes. Mildred and Mozart catch each other up on their situations, and then Mandy dive bombs Mozart with a massive purple ball of alchemic soul power. She shoves it down his throat, and he turns purple. She explains that she just removed all of his emotions. Believing this is the closest thing to him being evil, Mandy takes him back with her to her mansion, where he will be reintroduced to the family as a villain. She nicknames him Evil Jera Mozart, and the Evil Puffin meet and greet from hell begins. Mandy is finally happy that he'll be able to finally relate to their evil, but Mozart cuts her off and tells her that he's just deprived of emotion. He still hates her and everyone else now, too. Mozart repels all of them with disgust, and then, to everyone's utter shock and surprise, there's a knock at the door, followed by Poe and Suzanne walking right on in. Mandy freaks out and screams at them, telling them she killed both of them. Poe laughed and finally revealed to her that he's her grandfather. Mandy says she feels incredibly stupid, and Poe laughably agrees. Antoinette asks how they're here, and Poe explains how Mandy was too stupid in the heat of the moment to acknowledge that she killed Poe when he was suspended in limbo. This, of course, would send him down to deep limbo, where he had been residing ever since. He finally decided that he would sacrifice all of his powers, dimensionality, and alchemy in order to blast himself back into the real world. When he returned, he sensed a hidden portal in the beach cave, Roberta's, of course. Poe found Suzanne in the 0th dimension and pulled her through only minutes ago, feeling bad for what he had put her through her whole life. He explained everything to her. Pulling her back through used up all of the remaining alchemy Mildred had placed around the portal, and it finally destroyed Roberta's portal. Poe then explained how Suzanne's newfound knowledge has finally saved her from her evil ways, and she was more heroic now. Mandy called him a genius. A dead genius. She lunged at him and he flipped her into the ceiling with her own momentum. No superpower required, he just reflected what she threw at him. He's still way smarter than her. Mozart walks up to Poe, and Poe says it's nice to finally meet him. Poe asks for a hug, and Mozart, without emotions, laughs and snaps Poe's collarbone. Poe screams, and Suzanne begs everyone to listen to Poe's story of their lives. Everyone deserves to know why they're evil. Mandy slapped Suzanne into the ceiling. Poe begins to explain the McKeithenshalls as Charles and Jameson look away sheepishly. Mandy's sick and tired of Poe, and she punches him through the window and into her front yard. Suzanne runs after Poe, but David, of all people, blocks her and says that evil is the only thing keeping his family together, and being heroic will break them all apart. Then, all hell breaks loose as Ginger suddenly appears, ready for the madness. She throws Poe through the wall and David onto the floor and everyone else's feet, while Suzanne is thrown elsewhere. Ginger then bursts in and insults Mandy's house size and intelligence. Then Ginger approaches Charles and asks if Jameson followed through on their plan. Charles plays stupid, saying he doesn't know what she means, and she threatens to kill Jameson. Charles denies her any help, and she throws the old man across the room. She starts threatening everyone else. She grabs Antoinette and offers Jameson the same deal she offered Charles: information for the other's life. Suzanne barrels in trying to save the day, but Ginger sends her flying through the wall. Ginger asks one final time about her plan. She asks Jameson, "Did you remove your child's soul?" Basically, that was her plan. Have her son marry into her enemy's family, and create a son whose soul power he'd give to Ginger, who'd then take out the rest of the family with the super dimensionality. Jameson says he would never do anything to harm David. Ginger lets loose Antoinette and slides towards David. She's going to use the power to become a 12th dimensional being. She enchants Jameson's hands and forces him to rip out David's spirit. She skims some power off of it and returns it to him just fine. It was enough. She begins to glow blue as she ascends to an impossibly high state of being. David and the others flee Mandy's estate as Ginger absorbs an unconscious Suzanne, Poe, and Charles. Then her power activates, and the resulting conversion of matter to energy causes Mandy's mansion to explode in the most violent of ways. Ginger suddenly appears, with even more soul power now that she contains Suzanne, Poe, and Charles. She then disappears, and the city turns a shade of blue. The others watch as she becomes omnipresent, and they try to devise a plan to end her. The heroes and villains finally band together, and they go to the machine rehabilitation facility, where they combine all of their powers and start building a device capable of detaining Ginger. Mildred rebuilds her robot so they can use its power. Mandy once again rants about not being able to find the singularity fragment. While they work, they sing the song alchemically ingrained into the brains of all alchemists, the Mother of Death. Evil Mozart asks who the Mother of Death really is, and Mandy tells him that she was a woman who created all evil and ruined the work of the gods. She's just a myth, apparently, according to Jane, and nobody knows how much alchemic power this woman had. Just then, Mildred screams that she has an idea. Meanwhile, we see Ginger bringing her plans to fruition. As she easily warps herself to the 0th dimension, she descends very deep and finds her entire McKeithenshall family and attempts to resurrect them. She shares her power with them, and Ms. Finch slips away with the other caged heroes. Ginger briefly returns to the real world to grab some power, and then she spawns immense amounts of Martian dust, a material that is the basis of alchemic powder. The result of her forging it all together causes explosions rattling all across the 0th dimension, and Season 12 ends. So, once again, a pretty action-packed season with Ginger McKeithenshall at the helm of all insanity. Let's hop into Season 13. It begins with Ginger approaching Elderman McKeithenshall, the old man Poe killed. She presents the product of her Martian dust forging, the product being a Martian ruby. an alchemically astonishing masterpiece of power. Elderman refuses it and tells Ginger that she has gone too crazy after the events that have happened to her over the past several decades. He makes the ruby disappear, stating that there doesn't need to be another big alchemic jewel of the universe since the singularity fragment already exists. He then forfeits all of the family's power back to Ginger. He says that they're all disappointed in her. They never wanted her to become this evil. Something heinous has taken deep root in her. Angered, she flees back to the real world, but Marina jumps onto Ginger's soul from inside the cage and is teleported back alive with Ginger. Marina then sneaks off to find her family. Mandy reveals to the gang that the robots who built her mansion packed backup alchemy in the walls, and that she can just reconstruct the whole thing one final time by using her own alchemy. She does this, and their workplace is significantly upgraded. Marina appears, and Mandy stops her, fearing that she may be working for Ginger. Marina is upset as she explains how the McKeithenshalls killed her parents when she was younger. Mandy lets Marina right on in. They all ensue in some antics while building the weapon, some of them actually funny. Marina approaches emotionless Mozart, and he insults her to death.
Mozart, my love. Why are you purple?
Get away from me, you old ugly hag skank dumb idiot mentally broken sniveling weak pathetic donkey chicken loser noob stupid dummy.
She passes out while crying. Mandy explains to Mildred that they might need to use alchemic beasts known as Appa souls to take out Ginger. Nobody knows where they are, but these beasts could be of use should they track them down. Antoinette excitedly reveals that she's finally made an alchemic blowtorch, a weapon that can condemn any soul to any dimension, including the negative dimension, a place outside the universe where fractured souls reside. Jane takes the blowtorch and leads the group to a place Mildred believes Ginger hid her physical body. If they get to her body, then they can lock her soul back inside of it and take her out when she's in her bodily form. Ginger is invisible and she follows them. The Extreme Team Supreme Puffin scheme begins. They have reason to believe that Ginger hid her body beneath the city vault. Mildred suddenly passes out as Ginger is toying with them, so Antoinette promptly blasts open the vault and gets beneath it to find Ginger's body, all warped and protected by an electric field. Antoinette pulls out the blowtorch and prepares to light up the body, but Ginger appears and sucks Antoinette inside of her soul, like she did to Poe, Charles, and Suzanne. It is revealed that they've been trapped in a world inside of her soul, which is the most horrific place in existence. It's a red forest with horrific monsters constantly torturing them. Antoinette is very suspicious of Poe and cannot find him in this world. According to Suzanne, he simply disappeared several hours ago. Jameson goes down after Antoinette, but Ginger freezes him in his tracks. Then Mozart goes down, but his lack of emotion and thereby soul energy causes Ginger to be unable to control him. Mozart aims the blowtorch at her, gives an epic kill line, and then fries the hell out of her bodily vessel, sending her flying back inside of it with maximum energy. She may be in her physical form now, but she still has all of that dimensionality and alchemy. She lunges at Mozart, and the added momentum sends the blowtorch flying into the air out of his hands. He runs away as it lands, smashes onto Ginger's body, and explodes violently, burning her alive as she screams and runs around before completely vaporizing into lime-colored plasma. This, of course, causes her soul world to deteriorate, and Antoinette manages to warp out just as it implodes out of existence with Charles and Suzanne trapped inside. Antoinette appears beneath the vault with Mozart and Jameson, and they plan to take Ginger's plasma ashes and separate them all atom by atom so that she cannot regenerate. Then they'll bury it all. They dig a hole in the ground, Antoinette kicks the bag down, but then Jameson kicks his wife in the back, sending her flying down the hole as well before loading cement on top of it. This is because Ginger is not dead. She is in fact possessing her son. She escaped the vaporization at the last second by hiding inside of Jameson and willingly compromised her soul world. Antoinette fell to the bottom of the hole and broke through a patch of rock as she hit the bottom. She fell right through into what appeared to be a deep underground room? She looked around incredibly confused and found several people taking the form of shadows and one with a crown staring at her intently following her everywhere she went. Freaked out, she flew out of the concrete and ran screaming, "Appa souls!" Mildred explained to Mozart that Appa souls are alchemy-based creatures who lock onto someone else's soul and then devour it slowly by forcing them to do all opposite actions to what they're actually doing. They typically do this by forcing the person to do the opposite actions while they become their shadows. This causes the person's soul to be presumably sent to the negative dimension. Nobody has ever survived a day around these things, and then, rather abruptly, Season 13 ends. On to Season 14. Almost immediately, the Queen Appa Soul finds Jameson possessed by Ginger. Ginger frowns at the Appa Soul, claiming she recognizes who the Queen is. In return to Ginger's frown, the Appa Soul smiles. This action slowly rips Ginger's soul from Jameson's body, and the Queen absorbs Ginger right on up. The Queen flees just as Jameson wakes up. Up in the vault, Mildred is being harassed by an Appa Soul who also looks familiar to her. Mozart gives Mildred some alchemic powder and she throws it into her shadow. Her shadow hisses and then materializes like a real person. Mildred screams, "Mother!" and then the Appa Soul deteriorates and dies. Apparently, these Appa Souls have been normal people who are cursed. Mildred is aching after this soul deterioration, but she's fine. Then the team of Appa Souls flood out into the city. Emotionless Mozart is once again immune to the remote alchemic effects, therefore, the Appa Souls. Mozart looks into the hospital and watches as his family lays on their beds while Appa Souls force them to stand up. They appear to be constantly standing and laying on beds as their souls fizzle away. One of them tries to attack Mozart, and it appears to be Philip Scheer. Mozart kills him. Mozart then realizes that all of these creatures are real people who have been turned into these beasts somehow. This also leads him to conclude that the souls that they absorb don't go to the negative dimension. He believes that they all end up being funneled into the body of the Queen. He makes it his goal to get the Queen, not to help his family, but to study the Appa Souls. He goes into the hospital and kills all of them with alchemy. Then he uses Mandy's device, known as a being entrapper, and he brings the Queen back to Mandy's torturing room. Mozart explains that his alchemy is progressing to the intermediate stage. He interrogates the Queen. Suddenly, the Queen flays off her shadowy layer and reveals herself to be none other than Fay Schnackendoodler, Suzanne's mother. Then, the unthinkable happens. Lightning strikes outside, it gets incredibly dark, and it begins to downpour with rain. Poe McWince then slides through the dark halls of Mandy's manor and appears to Fay and Mozart. The whole room darkens and gets incredibly cold as he laughs like a maniac. He tells Fay that she played her part brilliantly, and then he brags about how the chaos he's caused is the best achievement of his life. He loves causing the immense suffering of others. This is a total 180 for Poe, and he explains. He explains how his grandpa always told him of alchemy, something Poe's very own great-grandpa created. Poe was lonely and bullied. He learned it when he needed to kill the McKeithenshalls, and he loved the corruption that came along with it. In fact, he became obsessed with corruption and inflicting it upon others. His first move was on Suzanne. The only reason he locked her soul behind a door for several years was to inflict torment upon her. He only locked her inside of Mandy so that Mandy could be corrupted too. Mozart asks how Poe knew Suzanne would return to being evil. He asks how Poe knew Philip would be tricked and incidentally killed by Suzanne. Poe laughs maniacally and finally reveals that it was he who killed Philip. On Mandy Scheer's delightful 5th birthday, he caused the horrific trauma that he knew would trigger Suzanne. He alchemically tripped up their feet and slammed Philip's head into the ground so hard that it basically shattered. He never taught Mandy god alchemy just because he wanted to take her to the precipice of ultimate alchemic abilities and then crush her dreams of absolute power. Poe's out to create chaos. Mozart asks how Poe escaped Ginger's soul world. He explains that he never even went there in the first place. When they were all squabbling, Poe replaced his body with a fake alchemic ragdoll. And that was what Ginger sucked up. And when he no longer needed to convince people, he removed it from the soul world. This of course was all possible because Poe never even lost his powers to begin with, because Mandy didn't kill him in limbo. He simply pulled open the portal after she walked away, and he only resurrected Suzanne so that she could be tormented in the mess of an evil argument the villains were having in Mandy's living room. Poe was never even controlled by Mandy. The Poe remote is something he's immune to. He only allowed Mandy to put it into her soul because he knew Suzanne would corrupt her even deeper. He lied this whole time just to convince everyone to corrupt themselves. He created Appa souls and immediately made his wife the queen. He placed that Appa soul den beneath the vault only minutes before Antoinette dug into it, simply because he wanted to create chaos, and because he wanted Ginger gone. After all, she was still slightly more powerful than him. Faye's not evil, she just thinks she is. Mozart still isn't really all that scared or surprised though, so with a snap of his fingers, Poe returns Mozart's emotions, and Mozart flips out. Poe lies to Faye and convinces her to teleport away so that Mozart will not be able to access the souls inside of her. Poe throws Mozart across the room and slowly and creepily slides and trudges through alchemic acid towards him. He then force chokes him into one of Mandy's nooses. Meanwhile, the rest of the gang are at the hospital. They find Mozart just in time and Poe disappears. Antoinette starts bragging that she called it, that she knew Poe was evil. Mozart explains everything and they all split up in an attempt to find and defeat Poe. David finds a spell in the form of an equation, which was written by one of the very first users of alchemy. He knows a thing or two about math and he begins solving it, hoping that it will lead to enough 12th dimensional power to defeat Poe. While he does that, the rest of them use Mandy's supercomputer to track Poe. They find him in his spot in China with Faye. They see him, but he can detect that he's being watched, and he fries the connection. Mildred brings out her hub robot, connects it to the computer, and teleports it to China. Hopefully he won't be able to detect this one. They all watch Faye explain to Poe what she did. Very recently, she had traveled to the 0th dimension to turn souls into Appa souls. She collected Kyle, Bill, Philip, Mildred's dad, grandpa, great-grandpa, and great-great-grandpa, Kyle's wife, and Mildred's mom. They all started absorbing a ton of souls, and Bill managed to even suck up Karen Dune, the creator of alchemy's wife, Poe's great-grandmother. Poe laughs and is pleased at this news. He slices Faye to bits and watches as all of the souls inside of her flood back into the 0th dimension. He catches Karen in the flood and pulls her out. He plans to use her as a hostage. He laughs and stares right at the invisible hub robot as he laughs and tells the gang that the equation is actually a spell to resurrect the creator of alchemy. They all scream at David, but it's too late. He has solved it, and the man behind him appears with lightning, completely incinerating David. The hub robot then autonomously wheels in, possessed by Poe. Poe says that he has Karen. The creator, known as Connor Isham, teleports away. The robot screams in agony, and it completely blows up, insinuating Poe's brutal death. This shockwave of a blast knocks what's left of the gang unconscious. Season 14, everybody. On to the final one explained today. 15, here we go. We get an alternate viewpoint of Poe's death. As he calls out to Connor, Connor teleports next to him, Karen throws Poe onto the ground, and he tries to warp his soul into the robot. When Connor chokes him in midair and shatters his body apart, Poe is only half connected to the robot, causing it to explode as well. This explosion put the rest of the main gang into the hospital, which Connor and his professional alchemist wife Karen visit. They give proof that Poe is completely dead, and Connor wakes them all up. They all assume him to be evil simply because of how things have been going up until this point, but Connor reveals that David only died because the equation he solved swaps a life for a life. Connor apologizes for their loss and disappears. Antoinette finds it all suspiciously anticlimactic. They are now out of the hospital, and Mildred rebuilds the hub robot yet again to spy on Connor. They track him to Jane's imploded mansion. Apparently, he rebuilt the basement and has been using it as a hideout. Their electromagnetic storm creates a bag full of a new kind of alchemy. The gang busts in, still believing he's going to be using it for evil. Jane points a bazooka at him and he vaporizes it. Jane flees and Antoinette starts begging Connor not to hurt them. Connor sighs and tells them that he's simply creating a new form of alchemy that will not corrupt people. In fact, he gives them all a bag. Then They all turn a shade of red, their memories are wiped, and they return to the states that they were at in Season 4, with Mildred and Mozart against Jane and Antoinette, as Connor and Karen slip away laughing evilly. As long as they hold those bags, these mental states will remain with them. They are subliminally forced to keep holding on to them, so only an external force can break this loop. While the heroes are subdued, Connor and Karen catch up with each other. Connor finally explains to Karen why he created alchemy. His great-grandmother was a strange woman, and it was all due to her half-sister, Gladys. Gladys was a little girl who was neglected by her parents and shunned because of her bastardization. She fought back, and this empowered Connor, so he wrote a poem based off of Gladys known as the Mother of Death, which is automatically ingrained into the brains of anyone who learns alchemy. Reciting the poem, in fact, increases the mental and physical power of the alchemist reciting it. After catching up, Connor and Karen get to work on their plan, which apparently involves destroying the dimensions for their power. Meanwhile, the heroes are about to duel in Mandy's living room, and Ginger, of all people, barrels in and screams, "Help me!" They tie her up, asking how in the freaking world she could possibly be back again, and she explains that when Poe let all of the souls out of Faye, she clung onto Karen as Poe yanked her out. Ginger then slipped away and has been teleporting slowly from China ever since, because she's incredibly weak. She explains that they are trying to get out of her. She then screams violently and exclaims that giving birth to 4 children wasn't as painful as this. Her restraints blow off, she trembles viciously, and as she has a seizure, Charles and Suzanne blast out of her soul world and through Ginger's mouth onto the floor. The pain is so much for Ginger that she falls at Jane's feet, and this causes Jane to accidentally drop her baggie of new alchemy. It explodes on Ginger's face, burning her face completely. She freaks out, causing her god alchemy to freak out with her, and this sends everyone flying into the wall, causing the rest to drop their baggies as well, putting them all out of their trance. Ginger falls down and passes out. Suddenly, Antoinette remembers from her alchemic flashback when Poe explained to Mandy about the end of all dimensions, a woman with a burnt face pinning a bunch of people to a wall. Antoinette has an actual heart attack and starts dying from this shock. And then Connor and Karen succeed. As Poe's prophecy finally comes to pass, the 0th dimension implodes into Connor's crystal ball, and the 3rd dimension shakes everyone. They promptly take Antoinette and Ginger to the hospital, and the doctor deduces that Ginger is in a coma. This is because she died, but her soul couldn't go to the 0th dimension because Connor took it, so her ghost is basically trapped in her body. Mozart freaks out and screams how they have to stop Connor, but then he and Karen take deep limbo and limbo. They then take the 4th dimension, freezing time around the city. They reveal that their goal is to finally breach alchemy and reach the level of magic, which is a whole other higher form of power that Connor actually based alchemy off of. Suddenly, and very strangely, an orange car drives into the frozen town and crashes into the Mare Tower to find Connor and Karen. 2 very mysterious men walk out with knives. Connor tries to stop them, but the dimensional crystal balls keep absorbing all of his alchemy. The knife men then stab Karen and Connor right in their stomachs, and they both scream horrifyingly as they disappear into red dust. Just like that. All of the dimensions are immediately let back out and time is restored just like that. But yet another new threat has appeared. These weird men. They walk right into the hospital and smile at an unconscious Ginger before walking out. Charles looks at them and flips out. He knows something about them, and clearly Ginger does too. Jane reveals that she has a secret crush on Charles, and everyone says that's gross. And in the last scene of season 15, they all go and do their jobs, looking up information on these men, while Antoinette, Jane, and Charles stay in the hospital, desperate for answers. And Charles knows everything. The history of Ginger, the mystery of these men, everything is interconnected. And season 15 ends. So pretty cool story. Here's a family tree. Go watch it at the playlist you'll be able to click in a sec. Bye.